Oscar Vinson spent most of his time in prison, either in solitary or in the infirmary. Convicted abusers of children have trouble making it out alive. His minor martial arts skills were no match for the numbers and the street fighting skills of his various assailants. Somehow, he gave a good account of himself and managed to survive the beatings, torture, stabbings, and assaults. He had been the temporary witch of more men than he wanted to remember. Everything had been sucked out of his life except one thing: the need for revenge. He was an innocent man. He was released from prison after 7 years, 3 months, and 2 days. But who was counting? He made it one day at a time. That sounds too easy unless you know each day seemed to last a year. Each day he woke up in prison, he wondered if today was the day they would succeed in killing him, or worse. Each night he went to bed, he was another day closer to revenge. That was all he had to look forward to. Oscar was glad no one showed up outside the gate, because if someone had, it probably would have been to kill him. He knew his family, his ex-family, had to be notified in order to protect his lying, backstabbing witch of a daughter. He knew on one level of consciousness that Carol had been coerced or brainwashed to testify against him. But on another level, she was a significant part of the cause of his losing everything. And it was not just her. Brian Hall was the true source of his misery. His former best friend had seduced his way into Oscar's family through money, flattery, and lying about what he had seen Oscar do with Carol. He suspected Brian had something to do with his students lying also. The fact that he married Oscar's wife as soon as the divorce was final showed what he had been after most: Jan, Oscar's wife. Jane had refused to believe her husband's contention that he had not done what was alleged. She sat by his nemesis during the trial. 15 years of marriage did not earn him enough chits for her to have faith in her husband's innocence. So much for better or worse. Her cheated rated closely behind Brian's. Now they knew he was out. Oscar worried for his life as much as when he was in prison. It was no secret Oscar was a threat to Brian's well-being. He had stated the same in court, loudly. There was no doubt in Oscar's mind that Brian was capable of killing him. The need to disappear to where Brian could not find him was his primary motive at the moment. No one would disagree that life had played a series of cruel jokes on Oscar. Now it was time for life to make up for being unfair. Repayment one was the bureaucratic mistake that had prevented Oscar's former family from being notified of his release before it happened. When Brian found out 3 days after the fact, he was pissed. Brian had indeed arranged a special homecoming. Oscar realized that the treatment he got from fellow prisoners had provided some blessings in disguise. The scars on his face were covered by a beard which, along with long hair, had greatly changed his appearance. In addition, when he had kitchen duty, Oscar received a grilling, which meant that several men held his hands down on a hot grill. At the time, Oscar would have traded anything to avoid that torture, but it had a current benefit in removing all fingerprints from his hands. That meant police or others would have to identify him by other means. By just keeping a shirt on, Oscar could avoid anyone seeing the molester, carving, and other scars on his chest. Oscar's first destination was Goodwill, where he bought clothes that were functional for the changing weather and would fit in well with his intended destination, homeless land. Next came survival, invisible survival. Life again helped. For some reason in his community, several churches and charities had gotten into a competition, although they would deny that descriptor, for which group could do the most for the homeless. As a result, homeless people from several surrounding cities made their way to where the help was. The number of homeless people grew in the same proportion in which services grew. Food was not an initial problem. There were several options for where he could get a free meal. Oscar soon learned what agencies would have the best meal on certain days. The Salvation Army was the least predictable. Sometimes they would serve only bologna and cheese sandwiches. Sometimes an upscale restaurant would send leftovers, which included some of the best, most expensive meals in town. Usually the choice was in between, depending on which group or church was supplying the food. Shelter was the biggest problem. Homeless meant just that. The Salvation Army had time limits on how long one could stay in their shelter. Oscar's time in the army helped him build his own protection from the elements in a wooded place in a city park. He found a large azalea bush that was open in the middle. By interlacing plastic bags among the overhanging branches, he was able to create a good barrier from the cold and rain. Good but not great. Oscar was the intended victim of several attempted muggings, but he used his knowledge of army and prison fighting techniques to quickly get a label of not to be messed with from the local gangs. It was after one attempted mugging of someone else that gained Oscar another blessing: Harvey. That night, Oscar heard a fight going on outside his hovel. Normally he just ignored such things as none of his business. As the fight went on and the shouting of the participants increased, Oscar went out to either end the fight or get them to quiet down. Oscar saw under the bridge that several men were attacking a giant of a guy. Although outnumbered, the large man was holding his own. The man kept saying, "Please stop. I don't want to hurt you." After the men kept attacking and the man kept pleading, Oscar spoke up. "Hey, big guy, it's okay for you to hurt them. They're trying to hurt you." Turning to Oscar, the man said, "Okay." Before Oscar could move to help him, the big man proceeded to start knocking out and or breaking parts of the gang members. Within a couple of minutes, the attackers that could get away did so. 3 were on the ground, unmoving. Oscar did not have to raise a hand. "I did the right thing, didn't I? I don't want to get sent away again. I did the right thing, didn't I?" Oscar quickly determined his large, new friend was mentally challenged while being physically talented. "Yes, you did the right thing. My name is Carlos Mendoza." Oscar had gotten documentation to have a new name to hide under. "What's your name?" "Harvey." "You're not going to call the police, are you?" "No, Harvey. I do think we need to leave in case someone else called the police. You never know when someone is going to lie and screw your life up." Oscar paused a moment as he saw blood on Harvey's jacket that was not from brushing against one of the subdued assailants. "Harvey, we need to get treatment for that wound." "No, I don't want to go to hospital." Harvey was very agitated. Oscar tried to calm him. "Well, we need to get that treated. You could bleed to death. Why don't you want to go to the hospital?" They might give me a shot. I'm scared of shots." Oscar paused to think. "Would you go if I went with you?" "You would go with me? You would stay with me?" "Sure." "Okay, but you have to stay with me." Oscar took off his muffler and told Harvey to use it to hold against his wound. They walked the 5 blocks to the emergency room. Harvey was admitted immediately. The staff wanted Oscar to wait and answer insurance questions. After Oscar briefly explained the situation, they put away the forms and allowed Oscar to be with Harvey. Apparently, scenes like this were not uncommon in this neighborhood. From then on, Oscar and Harvey were fast friends. He found out at the hospital that his new friend's full name was Harvey Silverman. Harvey had been in an institution since he was young, but was released after one of the deinstitutionalization programs sued the facility where he was a resident. Harvey had been a very late, unexpected child of a couple who were now dead. There were brothers and sisters, but none of them had really known or been allowed to help care for Harvey. So, technically a legally competent adult, he was left to fend for himself. Oscar and Harvey were a compatible duo. Oscar provided the brains and Harvey the brawn. It reminded Oscar of the characters in Of Mice and Men with, hopefully, a more agreeable ending. They scraped by together living off charity, but sometimes they would work when people were willing to pay under the table. Harvey's physical abilities made it easier to find work. Harvey would not take a job if his friend Carlos was not employed also. Although there was a considerable difference in cognitive level between the two, Oscar really enjoyed his conversations with Harvey. Oscar had to use smaller words and simpler explanations. But that was actually refreshing to Oscar. It taught him to be more succinct. His whole recent existence could be seen as simple. Evil man seduces family, family abandons him. He gets punished, he gets revenge. The only part of the sequence left was the revenge. When the divorce had occurred, Oscar had received a monetary settlement of over $50,000. Despite what his daughter had done to him, Oscar sent the money to his daughter for her college fund. His ex-wife sent it back saying that he could not make up for what he had done. So despite what good the dirty money might do their daughter, it was returned. Since he was heading for prison labeled as a molester, Oscar figured he would be dead soon after he was sent there. As a last gesture to his seemingly lost cause, Oscar made a deal with a private investigator, Ben Woods, to try and get proof that Brian had orchestrated Oscar's downfall and give it to the police. Ben was hesitant to take such an open-ended quest but agreed. The fact that he got $50,000 in advance helped. The last time Oscar had heard from Ben, the private investigator finally had gotten a lead he was pursuing. Nothing had come from Ben in the last number of months. Oscar had called shortly after getting out of prison. He was told that Ben had died a few months ago. They could not find a file on Oscar in their active files. Inactive cases had been archived. Oscar would have to appear in person with ID to get the case file, assuming his bill was paid up. Oscar asked how Ben had died. Killed in a mugging was the reply. A deep sense of dread hit Oscar. He was afraid Brian had figured out what Ben was doing and had eliminated him. He needed to find a way to get the file if Brian hadn't already destroyed it. It was Italian night at the Salvation Army when the next phase of Oscar's life emerged. One of the Methodist churches in town would prepare spaghetti with meat sauce, salad, and garlic bread. Homemade ice cream was the dessert. That was a treat not to be missed. Oscar and Harvey were enjoying the meal when a young couple started making rounds among the tables. Every so often they would stop at one of the tables and ask a man something and then move on. At second glance, Oscar knew who it was: Carol, his now grown-up, beautiful ex-daughter. She looked more like her mother than he had remembered. The dormant volcano of emotion in Oscar erupted. Red-hot, magma-level hate churned inside him. Although he wanted to curse loudly, he knew this was not the time or place. There might be others outside ready to harm him. He hoped his appearance had changed enough to escape detection. The couple came to where Oscar and Harvey was sitting. She looked at a paper that had an old photo of Oscar and she asked, "Are you Oscar Vincent?" Oscar made no eye contact and kept eating. She repeated the question. Harvey wondered why his buddy had not replied. "No, this is my friend Carlos." Carol looked frustrated and turned to the young man next to her. "Joe, I don't think we're going to find him in time." She started crying. "Come on, sweetheart. You need to be resting. That son of a witch probably wouldn't help you even if you did find him." They left together. Oscar was left wondering, what did she mean? Find him in time? Oh well, to hell with her. But he was bothered that his daughter would need to find him after so many years. He tried not to think of it anymore. The pendulum of life had swung back to bringing shit into his life. He decided he needed to take the risk and go to the PI's office. Just in case. Life intervened again. The local mayor was wanting to clean up the city in preparation for a Chamber of Commerce convention he had been able to persuade to come to his city. He wanted to show off, so the visible homeless problem had to become invisible. Police, who Oscar assumed were chosen on the basis of having several accusations of unjustifiable force, were sent to the area of Oscar's and Harvey's shelters. Oscar could have gotten away, but when Harvey was being tasered for the third time, he could not leave him. Going to jail would be traumatic and may lead to Harvey's institutionalization, or worse, death. He stayed and endured only one tasering. This was not Oscar's first jailing from a homeless roundup. His salvation in the past had been his lack of fingerprints. His ID said he was Carlos Mendoza, and there was no proof he wasn't Carlos as he claimed. Oscar had simply traded most of his identification documents with an illegal immigrant. His Spanish was good enough he could claim to be a Chicano. Prison proved to be a good place to improve his high school and college Spanish, especially with slang and insults. He begged to be in the cell with Harvey. After one particularly violent outburst from Harvey, the jailer let Oscar join him. Harvey quieted down quickly. Here came life again. Jean, Oscar's ex-wife, came to the jail. "I understand you have picked up a bunch of homeless men tonight. I am looking for my ex-husband. It's a matter of life and death." After explaining the circumstance, Jean gave the officer a description and old photo. The officer said that description fit a number of the men, but all had been identified as someone else based on their fingerprints. Jean was about to leave when the officer said, "Except, of course, for the man who had no fingerprints. He does fit the general description. He has a giant friend and keeps him calm. Can I see him? It really is a matter of life or death." She did not hesitate from using her good looks to influence the guard. "Okay, I'll take him to one of the interrogation rooms. You can look through the two-way window first. If it's him, you can talk to him." Carlos, or Oscar, was brought in the interrogation room and told to sit in the chair behind the table in the center of the room. Oscar knew that someone would be looking at him from the adjoining room. His fear was that it would be his ex-daughter, his ex-wife, or worse, his ex-best friend. Jean looked at the long-haired, bearded man at the table. She knew the man too well. "That's him. Let me in to see him, please. I need to restrain him first." "Is that necessary? I can't let you in otherwise. You have to be quick. I could get in a lot of trouble." Jean smiled and put her hand on his arm as a thank you gesture. Oscar was surprised that the officer came in and shackled his handcuffs to the ring in the middle of the table. "Oh shit," he exclaimed as his blood pressure shot up. Jean walked into the room and sat in the chair opposite her ex-husband. Oscar had trouble not admitting she still looked good. Really good. He remained silent with a stare that showed his contempt. She spoke first. "Hello, Oscar. Or is it Carlos? I need to come to the point. I never thought I would ever need to ask your immoral heart for a favor, but it's happened." "What?" "No. Good to see you, dear. Glad you're out of prison. Sorry I was part of throwing you under the bus." Oscar spat out, "Screw you, witch." "Oh, I'm sorry. You have my backstabbing, son of a witch ex-friend to perform that task." Trying to keep it under control, Jean went on, "I don't care what vengeful things you say about me or my husband, but I hope that somewhere in your dark, soulless heart you could have some compassion for your daughter. She has." Oscar interrupted. "I am in my previous statement. Screw you and my lying, witch of a daughter. I'm not here to retry your case. You were found guilty and got what you deserved. All she did was to tell the truth. Truth? You mean that nonsense you and your lover put in her brain? Tell me, did you and Brian talk to her before she testified? Did you tell her what to say? We told her to tell the truth. We gave her some hints as to how to answer the questions from your lawyer. That's all. I bet. Oscar went on before Jean could say more. As to getting what I deserved, if you mean it's okay for an innocent man to be assaulted, stabbed, beaten, kicked, and fried, if that was what I deserved, then you ought to be the Attorney General on another planet. What? I was told you were kept in isolation the whole time. They knew what happens to molesters. You're lying. Looking at you, it doesn't appear you were harmed that badly. Who told you that? Your lover, I suppose? The look on her face told him he was right. He lifted up his shirt so she could see the carved message and cigarette burn holes. I guess this doesn't look so bad, huh? Brian would probably say I carved this in my own skin just to make you feel sorry for me. Look at these hands. This is what happens when your buddies in prison mistake your hands for a Big Mac that needs to be cooked. You were stupid for believing Brian over me almost 8 years ago. Jean, has your stupidity grown since then? Tell me, did he set me up all himself, or were you in on it? Jean was building up tears in her eyes from what she saw had been done to her former husband. She tried to blank that out of her mind. She was a mother on a mission. Your lying about Brian won't help. What's done is done. I need to talk to you about Carol. Again, screw you and your daughter and your lover boy. Guard, take me back to my cell. She's dying. Oscar took a short pause before speaking. He snarled, I thought I had heard the lowest thing on earth from you at my trial, but this takes the cake. She didn't care that lying about me would likely get me killed. Why should I care if she dies? After seeing the pain in Jean's eyes, Oscar continued, What do you need from me you haven't already extracted? You need me to feel more pain? Go ahead and try. I have endured worse punishments than what you could ever inflict. A sobbing Jean answered, I'm not lying, Oscar. She has kidney cancer, both kidneys. She has to have a transplant immediately. No compatible donors are available. At least, please be tested to see if you are a match. If you ever felt any love for her, please do this. We'll pay you all we can. Pay me? You think I give a shit about money? After a moment's reflection, Oscar continued. Okay, I might, just might, cooperate if you will do these few simple things. Reverse the conviction, take away my scars and broken bones, and have the boys in prison unassault me. That's the payment I want. As far as love for my daughter, I gave her all my love that I didn't give to you. It was she that threw that away when she lied to the jury. Once again, screw you, her and Brian. Jean tried another ploy. Why don't you take some time and think about a reasonable reward? Surely there is something you need to become part of society again. If after you're tested and proved to be a match, we can talk about it. She's your only daughter. For God's sake, I'm begging you. If I'm not a match, you'll leave me alone? Yes. Will you promise that you see to it that the police thoroughly investigate my death after Brian has me killed? Brian is not trying to have you killed. Promise me or go to hell. Okay, I promise. The next day, some blood was drawn. The analysis was rushed. Oscar was a match. There was another meeting in the interrogation room. Jean began, You're a match. The transplant needs to be done right away. She's at the hospital now. We can do it tonight if the DA agrees to let you go. Once he knows the circumstance, there shouldn't be a problem. Now, have you thought of a reward? Is Brian in the other room? She looked sheepish. No, you're lying. Even after all these years, I still can read your face. Get rid of him, or the discussion is over. He's just trying to help keep Carol alive. Bullshit. Okay, I'll tell him to leave. No, give me your cell phone. Have Shitwad give his phone to Harvey in my cell. Dial your phone from his phone and give it to Harvey. If Brian leaves Harvey's sight, the deal's off. Despite Brian's protest, it was done as asked. Brian could not hear what was being said. Okay, Jean, this is the deal. I will give my slimy daughter a kidney. You have to promise me 2 things. You cannot tell, or even give a hint to your pissant husband that I have asked this of you. You cannot tell your daughter that I was the one who gave her the kidney. Do you promise? I promise not to tell anyone. I want you to go to the office of Ben Woods, private investigator. Here's the address. I gave him money to find out how Brian set me up. Look at me. I am risking the rest of my life that you may not have known what he did to me. I have no choice but to trust you. Ben is dead now. I think Brian had him killed, and please spare me the denial. Anyway, the last time I talked to him, He finally had a lead. I need you to get my file. They said his old cases had been archived. Let me know what it says. That's it. What if they can't find it or won't give it to me? Find a way to get it if it still exists. Okay, I'll try. Damn it, Jean. I know that tone. You'll try, unless something gets in your way like a hangnail or a run in your stocking. I want you to pledge on your daughter's life to search for it with the same passion you felt when you mistakenly believed that a-hole told you that I had assaulted our daughter. You better have fire in your belly to prove I am innocent. That's the promise I require, or say goodbye to your daughter. And remember, if you say anything to Brian, I'm a dead man. Jean agreed. The operation was scheduled for that night. As much as she worried about her daughter, she was confused by her conversation with Oscar. He had served his time. Why was he still trying to maintain his innocence? 5 little girls from Oscar's 5th grade elementary school class had testified about Oscar's touching. Brian and his girlfriend at the time had sworn they had seen Oscar behaving oddly with Carol. Why would they lie? Brian had been helpful in getting Carol to remember the times Oscar had been inappropriate with Carol. His promises of things he would buy for Carol were just rewards for telling the truth. Had she been so furious at the idea of Oscar's abusing their daughter that she had ignored that he could be innocent? These were doubts she had fought once before. It hurt too much to think she could be wrong. As soon as Jean was sure Carol was doing well after the surgery the next morning, she went on the quest for Oscar. She told Brian she was going to church to pray for the full recovery for her daughter. Church was not a place Brian liked to go. She went to the former office of Ben Woods. The receptionist greeted her and repeated the answer that Oscar had been told. The old files was archived. Jean requested she go to the archive and retrieve the file. The receptionist refused, saying that only the client could see the file and she didn't have the time to look for it. She said it was curious that so many people were interested in that file. Jean said, "You must have been the one my ex-husband talked to on the phone?" "Yes, but I was also talking about the man who came here." "Oscar came here?" "No. A guy who said he was Oscar's best friend and was asked by Oscar to get it for him. I told him the same thing I just told you." Jean asked for a description of the man, and her description matched her husband Brian perfectly. The doubt balloon was inflating again. Jean began to walk out when the promise she made to Oscar rose up from her emotions. She turned to the receptionist. "No, I cannot accept that. You are going to retrieve that file now and give it to me." The fire in her eyes scared the receptionist. "I can't. It's against the law. Look, a possibly innocent man has suffered unspeakable horrors in prison. I will pay you $1,000 to get that file right now." The receptionist thought a second. "Make it $2,000 and we've got a deal. But you can't let anyone know I did it." In 5 minutes, the office was closed, and Jean and the receptionist made their way to the basement. "I haven't been down here lately. The place gives me the creeps. I only archive files every 6 months. Watch out for the cobwebs. And if anything that even looks like a mouse appears, I'm out of here." In the 3rd row of shelves, they took a left to see files scattered all over the floor. "Oh my gosh, what happened? This one box has been emptied." It did not take long to figure out that the box of dumped files was the one that should have contained Oscar's file. His file was not there. Jean was devastated. They went back upstairs. The receptionist apologized. "I'm sorry. I wish I could do something." Jean wept and again moved to leave. "Wait, I almost forgot. After Mr. Vincent's phone call, I checked the records. It showed that Ben had not used up all of the advance money. Maybe Ben put your husband's leftover money in the safe. It could be he put the file there, too." The receptionist opened the safe and took out a large clasp envelope with Oscar's name on it. After paying the $2,000, Jean opened the manila envelope. There was a check, a flash drive, and a sworn statement. She told Jean, "I will let you have everything but the check. Mr. Vincent will have to come and sign for the money. My boss knows about the return check and I will have to have Mr. Vincent's signature on a receipt. My boss doesn't know about the other stuff." "Sure." Jean took the large envelope. Since Oscar was recovering on the same floor as her daughter, she decided to take the file to Oscar. Curiosity, however, got the best of her. While still sitting in her car in front of the PI firm's office, Jean read the sworn affidavit. The date of the affidavit was August 14th, the day before Ben was killed. "Oh my God. Oscar may be right." Jean read the statement from the girlfriend. "This is Betsy Mallard. I am Brian Hall's former girlfriend, and I helped him frame Oscar Vincent for molestation. I have not said anything before now because Brian said he would kill me, and I was guilty of perjury. The only reason I am testifying now is that I have stage 4 breast cancer, so I'm no longer scared of Brian or going to prison. Brian managed a department store and would hang out in the toy section. There was a particular doll that girls near Carol's age wanted more than anything else. It was very expensive. When a girl would show interest in the doll and the mother was not nearby, Brian would ask if they had Mr. Vincent as a teacher. For those who did, it started to work on them. Wouldn't it be nice to have this doll? It's very expensive, but I give a special discount to brave girls. There is another girl in your class who is very brave. She told me that a man had touched her and made her very uncomfortable. I agreed with her that no man other than a doctor should be allowed to touch her inappropriately. Men like that may not be bad, but they are sick and need help. The girl usually was in agreement. Mr. Vincent is a good friend of mine, but he needs help and won't admit it. Has Mr. Vincent ever touched you? The girl would usually say he had touched her hands, shoulder, back, or head. Brian would say, "You know that men who touch you on those places are really imagining they are touching you inappropriately?" That would usually shock the girl. Brian would continue by saying something like, "That girl I talked about is afraid to say anything unless some other girls would tell on Mr. Vincent too. Are you a brave girl? Would you like to see Mr. Vincent get help? I bet your parents have told you to do something that you didn't want to do. They probably said it was because it was the right thing to do even though you didn't agree. Then you found out afterwards it was the right thing to do." It is the same with adults. Mr. Vincent doesn't believe he needs help, but we need to help him see it's the right thing to do. Will you join your other friends and see that Mr. Vincent gets help? Think of his daughter Carol. Don't you want to protect her? Here, take the doll home. You can keep it if you and the other girls tell what Mr. Vincent has done. Once he had several girls convinced they had been molested, he went to work on Carol. Since he was Uncle Brian and had been the guest in their home many times, he had access to Carol. Neither Oscar or Jean had any fear leaving Brian alone with Carol, especially since he was with me, his girlfriend. He expanded his approach with Carol. "Carol, there's a lot of stories in the news about men molesting girls your age. Are you scared you might be touched inappropriately?" She said she was scared of strangers. "Did you know that most girls who were molested by relatives?" She said she didn't know that. "I don't think any adult male should be allowed to touch a little girl unless he is a doctor. Do you?" She said no. Men like that, especially relatives, are sick and need help. "You know your dad and I are best friends?" She said yes. "Well, he has told me that he has some other thoughts about you." Brian told her that was his illness. He asked her if she would help getting her dad some help for his illness. She said yes. Jean continued reading the girlfriend's statement. Brian had been keeping a calendar of those times when Oscar, Carol, Brian and I were together without Jean. Those were days Brian and I testified in court, were the days we could say we had witnessed inappropriate actions with his daughter. He rehearsed our testimony we would give in court and came up with answers to the questions Oscar's attorney would most likely ask. Brian got the girls and their parents together to let them know that his dear friend and their daughter's teacher had molested their girls. Then Brian asked each girl to tell their molestation stories. He hoped they would gain courage in numbers. It became almost a contest to see who had the most explicit stories. It worked. You could almost see a girl change her story in midstream to be the one with the most damaging story. The fix was in. Brian presented an edited video of the girls to Jean. He told Jean that he did not want her at the parents' meeting because they might have gotten violent with her. She fought the idea that her husband could do such things. When Carol's video came up, she lost it totally. Then Brian told her what he and the girlfriend had supposedly witnessed between Oscar and Carol while Jean was away. Why would Oscar's best friend lie? Oscar was dead to her at that point with no desire to hear his side of the story. No one would be on the side of a molester. When Oscar's lawyer tried to challenge the girls' stories, he made the girls cry, thus digging a deeper hole for his client. Once the trial was over and the dust had settled, Brian and I were supposed to take off to sunny places together. He kept putting the trip off, saying it wasn't the right time. But not long after the divorce was granted, Brian married Jean. So the plan I had been counting on fell through. I was dumped. Brian gave me a payoff and a threat of death if I ever recanted the story. I called Ben about a year ago after he first contacted me about 6 years prior. I told him that since I was dying of lung cancer, I was now willing to tell the truth. The tape was her confession and the sworn, notarized statement was the written version. Ben never had the chance to go to the police, but at least he was able to put these things in the safe. Jean suddenly realized what a fool she had been and what danger Oscar was in. Brian was probably at the hospital now, ostensibly to visit his stepdaughter, but, more concerning, to harm Oscar. She called the police and asked them to send an officer to the hospital immediately. It took a while to convince them to comply. She left for the hospital as soon as she hung up. Oscar was drowsy, coming out of one of the frequent naps he took after the anesthetic wore off. His stomach muscles cramped every time he coughed. Ouch. That hurts. He thought he was talking to no one, but saw a tall figure of a man at the bottom of his bed. It was Brian. Don't worry, old friend. You won't be hurting much longer. I just wanted you to be sure you knew who was going to do you in. Why couldn't you have died in prison like you were supposed to? Oh well, it did my heart good to hear of all the misery inflicted on you in prison. Maybe it was better for you to have suffered instead of being put out of your misery after all. He had a pillow in his hand and started approaching Oscar. I died a long time ago, Brian. I hope you got everything you wanted. By the way, why exactly did you do it? What did I do that pissed you off so bad you would force my daughter to lie and my wife to give up on me? What did you do? You took what I wanted most away from me. The woman I wanted to marry. I was dating her before you ever knew her. Then after we had a little fight, you used the time to steal her from me. Basically, you took my life from me. Every time I was with you and Jean, I was plotting how to get her back and get rid of you. Finally, I figured out a way. I not only got Jean back, but I picked up a wonderful daughter to boot. Now to keep everything I've worked for, there's just one more thing I need to do. He was next to Oscar's headrest now. How were you able to get the girls, especially Carol, to tell those lies? Brian described his plot, just as his girlfriend had put on the tape and in the sworn testimony. He was proud of his accomplishment. Congratulations, Brian, you won. Brian took the pillow and held it tight over Oscar's face. He was surprised that Oscar didn't struggle. Evidently, Oscar was ready to die. I have won again. It took a while for Oscar to regain consciousness. He took the oxygen mask off his face. There were a lot of people in his room. Medical people and law enforcement people and Harvey. Look, he's awake. Hey, buddy. Sorry it took me so long. I had trouble getting out from behind the bed, but I hurt him. I hurt him real bad. Was that okay? That was fine, Harvey. Do you have the recording? Yeah, but I wasn't sure how to turn it off. Here, you do it. Oscar took the recording device from Harvey and turned it off. He started it over to make sure Brian's confession could be heard. Harvey had come to find his friend as soon as he was released. He had hidden in the other half of Oscar's room, so he could stay and protect him. Oscar had instructed Harvey to start the recording whenever anyone came into his room and he was asleep. He had just hoped Harvey wouldn't fall asleep too. Did I do good, Carlos? Did I do good? You did excellent, my friend. Excellent. Does that mean good? It means the best good there is. Harvey smiled a mile wide. Oscar handed over the recording to the police after summarizing its contents. They watched as an injured Brian Hall was taken in handcuffs to the emergency room before being booked. The officer in charge commented that he had never been handed so much evidence at one time on a case this old. Oscar inquired, "What evidence do you have besides the recording?" "Your wife brought another tape plus a flash drive and document for evidence. The DA will love this as far as being able to convict Brian. He will not be happy about having to get your conviction overturned." Oscar's disposition changed sharply. "I don't have a wife." "She said she was. Anyway, she's in the room with your daughter." Oscar slipped and showed concern. "How is she?" Her daughter." One of the medical people spoke up. "As far as I know, she is doing fine. No signs of rejection, at least yet. Do you want to go visit her?" "No. Sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm sorry I snapped at you. There's so much history you're not aware of. Thank you for everything." After the police and extra medical personnel left, he turned to Harvey. "Buddy, we need to get back home. As soon as I can walk, we're out of here. Would you ask the nurse to come in here?" Oscar instructed the nurse that no one outside of medical personnel and Harvey was to come in his room, especially no ex-wife. No exceptions. Then he started the walking and breathing exercises recommended. He and Harvey heard a commotion that night outside his room. His ex-wife was demanding to see Oscar. She was told that she was not allowed, and if she kept up her protest, security would be called. They heard her stomp off. Oscar told Harvey they were leaving tomorrow morning during shift change. During the middle of the night, Oscar was awoken by a woman dressed as he was. It was his daughter. "Daddy, wake up. Wake up, please." As his mind focused, he said grimly, "Well, your mother's record for breaking promises is intact. Go back to bed. I have no daughter. You are going to get me arrested. I'm a molester. I'm required to stay 1,000 feet from you. Your conviction will be overturned, and I know you're not a molester. And you do have a daughter, and she loves you very much. She needs to apologize and start making up for being such a naive and, well, a horrible daughter. You've got to let me. I can't live with the guilt. Mom showed me the confession from Brian's old girlfriend. I can't believe he got me to lie. Mom and I have been crying for hours. We are so ashamed. You've got to let us make it up to you. Carol was sobbing. There is no way you can make up for what you did to me. I don't have a daughter or a wife, and I certainly don't love you. Get out. He pressed the nurse's button. No. And you do love me. You gave me a kidney. You saved my life. So, what? I give away kidneys left and right to any lying, easily bribed, ungrateful witch that asks for one. You just happen to be one of them. You're welcome. Now go away. Where is that damn nurse? Daddy, Mom and I deserve every bit of venom you can spew. I will accept it every time you decide you still need to do so. What I will not accept is not being around you for the rest of your life. I am your daughter and I am back in your life. I have to go back to bed now, but I'll be back for your daily dose of apologies tomorrow. By the way, Mom says the receptionist at Ben Wood's old office has some money for you. She left. Oscar thought, well, that's not quite what I had imagined would happen. What do you want to do, buddy? Harvey had heard everything from his bed on the floor. No change in plans. We leave tomorrow. During early morning shift change, one set of staff brief the next shift of staff, and patients are ignored even more than normal. Oscar had on his regular clothes, but he had shaved his beard and cut his hair. He acted like he was taking Harvey for a walk. He held on to Harvey and gave the opposite impression of who was helping whom. Once outside, Oscar informed Harvey that they did not have to go back to any of the places they had stayed before. He said that they now had some money and could go wherever they wanted. Oscar asked Harvey to choose. 2 seconds later, Harvey said, Disney World. You got it, buddy. Harvey and Oscar stayed at the hotel in Disney World. They rode every ride Harvey wanted to as many times as he wanted to. Both could not remember a more fun time. But as all times have to end, so did this fun time. Where do you want to have a home? I mean a real home. You mean you and me? Yes, you and me. I want a house with a garden. I want animals. I want a room of my own. I don't want to live close to anyone else. Harvey, you've thought a lot about this. I'm impressed. Let's go find that house. On the edge of town, Oscar found a house to rent that suited Harvey. They would have to get the landlord to fence in the yard for pets, but they were able to increase the deposit to influence the landlord to agree. Goodwill and a secondhand store provided most of the furniture. Money was now an issue. Oscar hired an attorney to sue Brian Hall for several million. The response he got was surprising. Out of the blue, Jane came to his house to see him in person. You don't have to sue Brian. I will be getting everything he has of value in the divorce. You can have whatever you want. I do have a price, however, for my cooperation. Take it up with my lawyer. I don't deal with unfaithful women. Damn it, Oscar. I was not unfaithful to you. Brian and I did not date until we were divorced. You had no faith in me when I was accused of molesting. You had faith in a lying womanizer that only wanted to get into bed with you. He barely worked up a sweat pulling off his scam. You evidently wanted to believe I was a molester. That's how you were unfaithful. When you put it that way, I can see your point. I will never forgive myself for letting that happen. He was a master seducer, and I was too easily seduced. Did you see how much I cried during the trial? Some tears were for my daughter. Most of the tears were for losing my husband, my best friend, the love of my life. I will never stop trying to make it up to you, even if it takes the rest of my life. You don't have enough lifetimes. You may be right. Carol and I talked about what we could do. The way we see it, you have had to build a wall of horrible memories that you are hiding behind. We helped build that wall. What we intend to do is to use good, new memories to take the bricks out of your wall and use the bricks to build a bridge from us to you. We know it will take a long time. I don't see how you're going to do that when we will not have contact for the rest of our lives. Oh yes, we will. I have no other job now than to make it up to you and take care of grandchildren. Did you know that Carol is pregnant? The word grandchildren hit Oscar in the gut. He mellowed suddenly but recovered. I have no children, so I can't have grandchildren. Oscar, you have had an unbelievable amount of suffering, none of which was your fault. Why? Oh, why would you want to punish yourself by keeping yourself from the joy of watching your grandchildren grow up? While I'm at it, why would you punish yourself from being loved by your wife and child when we owe you more love than you have ever had before? Yes, staying away would punish us and you might get some revenge from that, but that's a dark emotion. It would punish you too. You don't deserve more punishment, even from yourself. Oscar couldn't think of a quick response. Jean let the silence get a foot in the door, literally. Now let's see what two men have done to mess up any sense of decor with how this place is furnished. She proceeded to look through each room and take notes. What are you doing here? Harvey asked Jean. I'm trying to help you and Oscar make this house better looking. Do you mean Carlos? I get confused with people calling him different names. That's okay. You can use either name. You don't mind if I help spruce up the place, do you? I don't care. Do you know anything about gardening? I can plant and weed and fertilize, but I don't know what I should plant and when. Can you help? I would love to. And where can I get a puppy? Have you been to the animal shelter? No. What is that? That's where they keep dogs and cats who are waiting for people to adopt them. I was supposed to be adopted, but no one wanted me. Well, if you want to go, I'll be glad to take you to the shelter. Can we go now? Jean chuckled and turned to see a fuming Oscar who had overheard their conversation. He spoke, Harvey, we have to get the pen built before we can have pets, remember? Jean, can I have a word with you? Once out of Harvey's hearing, Oscar angrily admonished Jean. You don't think I know what you're doing? Taking advantage of my friendship with Harvey to get your way. If you do anything to hurt Harvey, I'll do something to you that will get me back in prison for a crime I did commit. Jean replied sternly, if there is anyone that's going to get hurt, it's you. If there is anyone who's going to be doing the hurting, that's also you. Now you and Harvey get cleaned up. You two are going to have dinner with me, your daughter, and your son-in-law at 6 o'clock. Got it? After a second to think, gee, I can't think of anything I would rather do, but I almost forgot. I have no car. Sorry, we'll have to take a rain check. Silly boy. You will take me home in the car I came in. You should recognize it. It's your old car. Carol has been driving it. I gave her Brian's car. She's giving you her car. It's easier to transfer title between daughter and father. Now take me home. Dang, I also forgot. I don't have a driver's license anymore. Oscar Vincent, you are not going to get out of this. I won't tell. Now drive me home. Oh, I forgot. Harvey, is there anything you don't like to eat? After thinking for a minute, Harvey offered liver, grapefruit, Brussels sprouts, and butterscotch. I eat most anything else and lots of it. Oscar drove Jean home. Jean wasn't silent. She cried. I have carried a lot of hate around for many years. Now that hate has become the hate I have for myself. How could I have been so stupid? You probably practiced a lot. Jean was crying and laughing at the same time. You are still a smart man, and I love you more now than I ever did. Please let me and Carol love you. You said before that loving me and our grandchildren was all you were going to do? What about your job? I forget you have been up on the changes over the years. My mom died recently, and I stand to inherit a nice sum of money. I have already retired. Won't Brian get half of that? According to my attorney, he won't. The will hasn't been probated and the funds have been frozen with my filing for divorce. Jean paused and smiled. Now my next husband will get half. Oscar grimaced at that statement. Oscar drove back to what they are calling the garden home. Harvey was already getting ready to go to dinner. Whoa, Harvey. I'm not sure we're going. What? I want to go. That's a nice lady. Why aren't you still married to her? She's pretty too. It's a long story. She and my daughter did some really bad things to me. I don't think I would enjoy being with them. Well, they haven't been bad to me. You have to take me even if you don't go. Oscar was shocked. This is the first time that Harvey had said he wanted to go somewhere without Carlos or Oscar going with him. This may be a good sign. I'll take you and stay a while. I warn you, I may have to leave early, so you will have to decide to go with me or stay and have one of them bring you home. I want to stay with them. Oscar thought, damn, they're all ganging up on me. Harvey and Oscar arrived late. They were welcomed with hugs, except Oscar refused. Carol wasn't showing yet, but was accepting of pats to the belly. Oscar turned down that opportunity too, and wanted to say it was because he didn't want to be accused of assault. Fortunately, he kept his mouth shut. Everyone was jovial and stories of the old days before the trial were told. Oscar was dubious of Joe. His son-in-law seemed to have more trouble in switching from treating his father-in-law as a demon to an object of pity. Harvey was having a great time. He had not been the part of a family before, and he seemed to fit right into this one. Oscar was tempted to let go, become part of the family again, and let bygones be bygones. Then it hit him, and the temptation rapidly disappeared. Jean and Carol have spent the last almost 8 years laughing and loving with Brian while I was in hell. There was nothing that could change that. He excused himself to go to the bathroom. He knew the window could be opened from the inside and was on the ground floor. Oscar made his escape. His car was in back on a downhill slope. He put the car in neutral and coasted down the drive. Once to the street, he started the car and headed to the garden home. At the house, he gathered personal items and some cash. He left a note on the door. Then Oscar headed for parts unknown even to himself. Jean was the first to notice Oscar's absence. She went to the bathroom. After knocking and calling, She summoned Harvey to break the door open. When he did, she could see the open window and realized he had fled. Jean ran to the front door and saw the car missing. Jean drove as fast as she could to the garden home. She hoped Oscar had just decided the family scene was too much and needed a break. She feared that he had taken off. When she did not see his car at the house, she knew her greatest fear was real. The note on the door cemented the issue. Jean, I appreciate that you and Carol want to make up for the tragedy that I suffered. I'm sorry, but when I saw tonight what I had missed out on for over 7+ years, I broke down. I forgive you both, but I can't forget. I will never get those 7 years back. Those 7 years of nightmares will never leave me. They are with me every minute of every day. I don't know if I can have a normal life again. If I am able, I believe it must be a totally new life. Please take care of Harvey. He needs a loving family. I do too, but not yours and Carol's. Please don't try to find me. I have to do that for myself. Oscar. Jean started crying again and didn't care if she ever stopped. One moment she chastised herself for not doing the right thing that would have given her Oscar back in her life. The next moment she wondered if there was anything that could have made that possible. From that day forward, Jean was the best grandmother she could be. When not being a grandmother, she spent the time necessary to see that Harvey and his garden, 3 dogs and a cat, were doing well. All other time was spent figuring out what she should do if Oscar were to give her a second chance. The one activity that she agreed to do outside the family was to volunteer at the Salvation Army. Oscar might never come back there again, but maybe she could help other Oscars that passed through. She prayed for him to return every night. Oscar agreed with Jean in that Jean and Carol would be punished by their guilt, and he could get some revenge that way. He figured 7 years of guilt without any relief from him might be enough revenge, but he doubted it. He wavered back and forth that he had been too nice in the note. All that forgiveness stuff. Anyway, there was more revenge to be had. Oscar did not go too far away because he was waiting to see where Brian would be sent to prison. He prayed it was going to be the same prison he went to. Life's pendulum swung back in his favor one last time. Brian was in Oscar's former hellhole. Showtime. As soon as Brian entered prison, Oscar paid a visit one of his former tormentors still in prison, Tyrone. Word had gotten around for a while that Oscar had actually been found innocent of molesting. Tyrone spoke before Oscar could. Hey man, I'm sorry for what we did to you. You know that everyone here says they are innocent. I wish we could make it up to you. Funny you should say that. How would you like to receive a carton of cigarettes every week for the rest of your sentence? Oscar had heard that the best revenge was a life well lived. He intended to test that theory. He was on a plane headed for Costa Rica. Why Costa Rica? Beautiful country, year-round nice climate, relatively safe crime-wise, drinkable water, great food, cheap utilities, and plenty of expatriates if he needed an American fix every now and then. He had read the tour books and selected Grecia in the middle of the country as his city to live in, at least for now. Chris Shue from Grecia Real Estate found him a nice house on the bus route. It even had banana, papaya, and mango trees in his yard. He decided against getting a car, at least for the time being, since cars in Costa Rica were very expensive and the bus and cab systems were reliable and cheap. He was ready to live life well. His daily routine started with coffee with the gringos at the Café Delicious near the Central Park by the Metallic Church. Americans were not the only expats there, but constituted the majority. Political leanings varied between left and right. Several patrons would not get into political discussions at all. They were living in Costa Rica partly to escape the harshness and divisiveness of political dialogue in the US. He had no trouble speaking Spanish with the locals. Well, he did have to adjust to not cussing so much and using Tex-Mex slang. Then there was the getting used to Costa Rican tissismos like saying mucho gusto instead of de nada or por nada, and ciao instead of adios. Of course, there was the Costa Rican phrase that can be used in any situation, pura vida. Oscar was more than ready for intimate contact with a woman. Another reason for choosing Costa Rica was that old trade was legal and well regulated. Price varied by youth and looks. Oscar did not keep one girl long. Some women he got rid of once they started saying about how poor their families were, or about the need to help some elderly and disabled relative. Marriage and access to his bank account was their intent. Some were scared off when he had one of his nightmares from being tortured in prison, especially if he struck out at his phantom abusers and hit the girl by mistake. She yelled, "Why you hit me for? You crazy? I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I was having a nightmare. You can't hit me. You call taxi. I go now." She started getting dressed. Oscar made the call and then put on his clothes. He went over to the girl. "Here, take this extra money." She grabbed the money. "You got nice body, but you too crazy for me. You need go see doctor. Get you head fixed. I know come back. It seemed strange to him to accept the advice of a hooker, but he did. Oscar would try sedatives and drink in hopes of keeping the nightmares away. Nothing was working. He had already found out from his gringo friends that medical care in Costa Rica was first-rate and cheap. No one, however, had experience with any of the local therapists. He received a referral from the dentist he had gone to for a crown replacement. Dr. Rebecca Perez was the therapist recommended. She was beautiful even in her very professional pantsuit. Oscar and she made the basic information exchange. She noticed how he was looking at her. Dr. Perez spoke. Is there a problem with the way I am dressed? Just the opposite. You are very pretty. I would love to take you to dinner sometime. Dr. Perez put down the notebook she had in her hands. You need to decide right now if you want to waste your money and time thinking about an inappropriate relationship with your therapist or if you want to work to solve your problem. You need to decide now. Oscar was ashamed. Hookers and waitresses were about the only local women Oscar had really been acquainted with. He apologized and said he was here to get help. Then he apologized again. Okay, now tell me about your problem. Oscar took a big sigh and began to explain the whole incident, imprisonment, and subsequent events. About halfway through, he noticed they were going past the scheduled time. Dr. Perez asked him to continue. She wanted the whole story. During his description of the prison tortures, she began to cry silently, and he had even left out the worst parts. In describing the nightmares, Oscar was the one crying. He was afraid that they would be with him the rest of his life. He wanted to keep them from ever coming back again. Dr. Perez said that was probably not going to happen. Oscar asked what to do. She suggested a technique that had worked with some of her former patients suffering from trauma and recurring nightmares. First of all, it is important for you to know that you have a legitimate reason for your nightmares. By that I mean you are not having these dreams because you have some mental illness that causes them. Your mind is trying to deal with all the injustices and torture that you suffered. Your mind needs to produce some number of nightmares to help you heal. The problem is that you do not know how many of them you will have. What I want you to try is this. Whenever you have another nightmare, and you will, I want you to thank God that you now have one less nightmare to deal with on the way to getting well. Be grateful. Learn to be glad in your progress. Oscar was skeptical about that approach, but promised to try. Over the next few weeks, he did as instructed and was surprised by how much quicker he seemed to recover from each nightmare. Then the nightmares became fewer and fewer. Oscar was able to invite hookers to bed again, but he didn't use them as much as before because he enjoyed getting a full night's sleep. He thanked Rebecca as he was now allowed to call her. Future sessions with Rebecca dealt with his family and the feeling of the need for revenge. Dr. Perez tried to get him to look at things from Jean's and Carol's perspectives. Despite her efforts, he could not see how they could have betrayed him. Oscar was positive that if the roles had been reversed, he would have believed his wife and daughter over someone like Brian. He did, however, admit the hate he had for Brian far exceeded what he felt for his wife and daughter. Dr. Perez tried a different approach. You mentioned you did not want to meet your grandson. By agreeing that he was your grandson, you would have to agree that his mother was still your daughter. Oscar, I think that is just a somatic game you are playing. He is your grandson, your flesh and blood. He did nothing for you to punish him. I haven't punished him. I've just never been around him. So, if I was deliberately keeping someone's grandfather from his grandson, I would not be doing anything wrong? Oscar saw her point. He had been deliberately keeping his grandson from himself. How can I have a relationship with him and not his mother and grandmother? You don't think your wife and daughter would let you see him without their direct participation? I don't know. And what do you need to do to find out? You're treating me like a little child. You're acting like a little child. Ouch. I see what you're getting at. I could ask them if they were willing to do that. He didn't tell her that he doubted it would be anytime soon. The session ended with an agreement not to meet until and if Oscar requested. After the last session, Oscar began to wonder what was happening back at home. His attorney was the only person who had his mailing address. Even then, it was just a post office box at the Grecia post office. His lawyer told him that the story of his life was going to be made into a movie. The movie personnel's biggest fear was that people might see his true story as being too harsh to be real. They wanted to make sure Oscar would come back for promotions for the film. As Oscar thought about it, it seemed like that might be a good time to return. Oscar told his breakfast coffee friends about his possibly building a relationship with his grandson. He thought it might even be a step towards forgiving his wife and daughter. I have told myself I would never forgive them. Roger, a Canadian, responded, well, friend, I have found that never doesn't last as long as it used to. Both chuckled. The next letter from his lawyer let him know about Harvey. He was doing well. Oscar was able to buy the house Harvey, and he had lived in, so Harvey never had to worry about paying rent. Harvey had a job at the local Southern States coop, mostly tossing around or stacking 50-pound sacks of feed, grain, or fertilizer. He liked the job. The biggest news was that Harvey had a girlfriend, Sally. Jean and Carol had checked the girl out to make sure she was not being nice to Harvey to take advantage of him. The word from Jean was that the girl truly cared for Harvey. There may have been some taking advantage of him by the girl. Sally had told them it would not surprise them if Harvey and the girl got married. Oscar smiled at the news. He had invited Harvey to come to Costa Rica. Harvey declined because of fear of flying. Now there was a girlfriend. Oscar knew Harvey would never be talked into coming. He was glad Jean and Carol had honored his wish that Harvey be looked after. Thinking good thoughts of them was still alien to him, so it didn't last long. The news Oscar wanted to hear was about what had happened to Brian in prison. As far as the lawyer knew, Brian had been in isolation a lot. There had been some minor altercations, but nothing substantive. Oscar was not happy. Months passed without much change of routine in Grecia or news from home. One day, the mail had a letter from his attorney saying that the movie had been completed and they had a tentative date for the opening. As all producers and directors will claim, it will be a big hit. Oscar began to look forward to returning. The premiere showing was to be in his hometown. Oscar was welcomed back by many of those who condemned him as a molester. After a few parties and picture-taking events and media interviews, Oscar headed to see Harvey and meet the new girlfriend. It was a happy reunion and Oscar was positively impressed by the girlfriend, Sally, who was pretty and not even half the size as Harvey. She was less mentally challenged than Harvey. They seemed to be much in love. Harvey told Oscar, "I really like my job. I can get as dirty as I want. Sally makes me take off my clothes as soon as I get in the door. Then I go to the shower." Harvey grinned. "She likes to see me naked." Sally giggled. They had a nice visit. Oscar had not felt this good in a long time. The good feeling did not last long. Oscar next made his way to prison to visit Brian. His purpose was to gloat. He got a surprise. Brian sat across from him and was grinning. "Hey, old buddy. I didn't know what a candy but you really were when you made such a big deal of your treatment in prison. It's not so bad. Couple of scuffles and verbal threats. No big deal." Oscar was steaming. Brian took advantage. "How does it feel to know I tapped that great body of your ex-wife for 7 years while you were in prison? I probably had more sex with her in those 7 years than you two had in 15 years. She just couldn't get enough of me. She said she was mad at herself sleeping with me all those years ago. I could screw so much better than you, that is, according to her. Guess who she is missing now that I'm gone? Not you." He laughed. Oscar wanted to break through the glass and wring his neck. Brian continued, past some nasty comments about his daughter. "You lying son of a witch, piece of shit." Oscar stood up so fast that he upset his chair. Brian just stared at him and said, "But you don't know if I'm lying or not, do you?" He broke out in laughter again. Oscar just got up and left. He busted a knuckle hitting the nearest wall outside the visiting area. He asked to speak to Tyrone next. After waiting an hour, Oscar didn't even let Tyrone get seated before yelling, "What the hell is going on? Calm down, dude. Don't excite the guards." Tyrone thought Oscar should know better since the guards listened in. "Now tell me about the family." Oscar simmered down. "Well, I told you before about my cousin that had to go to the hospital. It seems there was nothing really wrong with him after all. What do you think about that? Things aren't always like they appear. Maybe he had guardian angels protecting him. You know, the ones in white robes. They do a good job of protecting believers who contribute to their church. A lot of people contribute to the different churches. I wonder how much one has to contribute before heaven hears your prayers. I would think that it would take a lot for God to hear my prayers. Tyrone, I have a lot of faith in you. I bet that whatever it would take to answer your prayers, it will be done." "Thank you, Oscar. That makes me feel better. By the way, what problem was your cousin having?" "He had a urinary problem. Said he was not able to pee, much less have sex." "Oh, that's too bad. Don't worry, though. I think the doctors can take care of it now." Oscar left in a better mood. He thought about how Tyrone had implied that Brian had gotten the Aryan Brotherhood to protect him. He speculated it was probably Brian's dad who owned the department store Brian managed that provided the money. Although Oscar was upset Brian's father had probably bribed the AB, Oscar was happy that the father had given up his claim to half of Jean's house. There was very little mortgage left for Jean to pay. Oscar then went to his lawyer to see that any bill from Tyrone for services rendered was to be paid, no matter the amount. Oscar had agreed to meet with Jean and Carol. They immediately apologized and begged him to come home. Nothing new. He did ask to see his grandson if they could arrange a meeting without them around. Carol was speechless at first, but agreed to bring Jeremy to the park where Carol and Jean could watch from afar. Jeremy was very social and had fun with his grandfather. Carol noticed tears in her father's eyes when he brought Jeremy back. Was this a breakthrough? Was he finally thawing? Oscar did surprise them with a gift for looking after Harvey. After noticing the shape their vehicles were in, he bought each of them a new vehicle. His friend and neighbor, Terry at the Toyota dealership, had been one of the few who took Oscar's side in the molester charges. He paid sticker price even though Terry offered a much better deal. Oscar left for Costa Rica again. He wanted to be out of the country when, hopefully, something bad happened to Brian. Several weeks later he got the news. His lawyer sent a quote from a note smuggled out by Tyrone. Aryan Brotherhood got bigger bribe. The only tool Brian will be able to use now is the one he will find in his mouth or up his butt. The lawyer concluded with a short note that Tyrone's bill had been paid, and he didn't want to know what for. Oscar was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. After buying a few rounds of Imperial beer for his friends, Oscar announced, "Anyone who says revenge is not worth it hasn't done the revenge right." Although they didn't know what he meant, they all cheered and had another beer. After returning home, Oscar noticed that his desire for continued revenge against his wife and daughter was lessened by the news of Brian's medical issue. May he rot in hell. The movie was a hit to everyone except those in Oscar's hometown. They did not like how they had been portrayed as backstabbers who jumped at the chance to convict an innocent man and send him to years of torture. The DA was seen as trying to launch his political career off Oscar's conviction. Jean, Carol, and Brian's characters were cast as horrible villains. Jean and Brian were supposedly lovers before the trial. Carol was a Lindsay Lohan clone who liked rebelling against her doting father. The next news from the lawyer about the movie had a request attached. Also enclosed was a letter from Carol. His attorney explained, "I know you told me not to send letters from your former family, but when I read what she wrote, I decided to recommend you read it. What you have done seems to have had unintended consequences. Of course, it is up to you to read it or not." Oscar was torn. The message about Brian had Oscar feeling good. He decided to take a chance. The letter from Carol read, "Dad, Mom and I have spent almost every day feeling guilty about how we treated you years ago. I want you to know now we're not feeling so guilty anymore. That's not to say we don't greatly regret what we did, because we still do. But the movie has ruined what part of our lives the guilt from our treatment of you didn't destroy. We have been shunned, threatened, insulted, and refused service. Jeremy, the grandson you once disowned, got verbally attacked at preschool because of how I was portrayed in the movie. Joe has left me. He couldn't take the stress. He fought for every penny in the divorce. The prick was supposed to pay me $350 a month in child support. You know how he pays me? He pays me $10.50 a day, by check or, sometimes, pennies, just for spite. Mom and I and Jeremy are living together now in a different town. She has had to go back to using her maiden name. We are facing bankruptcy. I'm sure that somewhere in your vengeful mind you are happy about the situation we've been put in. At least someone is happy. We don't go out much these days. We don't have money to go out, and we don't want to take the chance of being recognized. For fun, we sit around and imagine what will be the next dose of hell you have in store for us. I know we deserve some pain for what we did, but, well, just screw you, Dad." Carol. Oscar was mad. Not so much at what Carol had said to him. It was one thing for him to get revenge on his family. That was his right, maybe even his duty. But for non-family to attack his family, that was a declaration of war. Oscar booked a flight as soon as he could and headed back to his hometown and found out from his lawyer where his ex-family had moved to. He went there immediately. The door opened and Oscar saw a Jean he had never seen before. She had lost weight and added wrinkles. She showed no emotions. Turning towards the kitchen, she yelled, "Carol, your father is here to gloat." When she turned back to Oscar, she could see the tears in his eyes. Her disposition warmed a little. "Oh my goodness, he may have a heart after all. Well, you might as well come in." It was then he saw Jeremy, who said, "Oh, it's my a-hole grandfather." Evidently, those two words had been used together several times in his hearing lately. Oscar smiled and spoke, "Yes, I am your a-hole grandfather. I am glad to see you again." Jeremy didn't seem to know how to act towards Oscar. Jean asked, "So, just why are you here, Oscar?" "Well, I received a warm letter from Carol that I took as an invitation to visit. So here I am." "Scumsucker. If you are here to extract any more vengeance from us, just leave now. Actually, we don't expect anything else, so just leave." I wanted to tell you too that I had no idea of the repercussions the movie would have on you all. Yes, I intended and enjoyed the revenge I had planned in the past. You did not, however, deserve the punishment that has come from others. Since it is partially my fault, I would like to help make up for that." Jean and Carol looked disbelievingly at each other. Carol said to Jean, "You think it's a trick to get our hopes up just to turn around and dash them?" "Could be. Let's hear him out. We can always kick him out later." Oscar said, "It appears you all have made the effort to make a new start. How is that going?" Jean spoke for the two. "Not so good. We're too close to the hometown. We need to get farther away, but we can't afford it. Carol and I need better paying jobs and someone to help with Jeremy. We didn't want to get too far from Harvey, but he seems to be doing fine with his new wife." "Harvey got married?" Jean nodded yes. Oscar appeared pleased, then resumed the discussion. "Where would you like to move to?" "As far away as possible. You got any recommendations?" "As matter of fact, yes I do." "Oh, really? To what do we owe this benevolent consideration from you? I am really suspicious of you suddenly treating us with some modicum of decency. You don't know how much we've both wanted to see the day, but we're gun-shy. Is this really the day?" "I guess you could say I have had sudden attack of responsibility. I have gone to a wonderful therapist who has helped me overcome my fear of nightmares and prepared me to become something of a human being again. She has helped me see that as much as I owed you in retribution, I owed you also for the years before that. I think I have had enough revenge, or at least, I think I should have had enough revenge. Now I am looking forward to that making up time you two talked about. Unless that was just talk?" "Oscar Vincent, you better believe it wasn't just talk. If you are shitting us around now, however, you will think I invented the concept of revenge. Now what is your proposal?" "I propose that we get you all away from here. Far away. I can have my lawyer check on Harvey. We are different people than we were before the trial and during the 8 years I was away. I do not know what kind of family we might make again, but I would like to see. Maybe without the pressure, we can be free to explore possible relationships. I will pay for everything. The movie may have been devastating for you, but it has made me relatively rich. What do you think?" Jean and Carol looked at each other. They smiled at each other. Carol asked, "Will we need passports?" Oscar smiled, "Yes. And here is a book to study." It was Costa Rican Spanish. Life with the Vincent family in Costa Rica was good, but not great. Chris from Grecia Real Estate had been able to find a home that met with Oscar's approval. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a small, 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, guest house on the grounds. Oscar wanted the flexibility to get away from his wife and daughter when he felt the need. It took a while to get the homes furnished and pantries stocked. They ate out a lot at first, and the women found out that Oscar was well known and very popular. It took a few weeks before either Jean or Carol would go out without Oscar. First, they could get lost easily, and secondly, their Spanish was minimal. They quickly found that Grecia was easy to navigate with the metallic church as the visible, central point in town. Most people in service positions knew enough English, so Spanish fluency was not really needed. Oscar understood their apprehension and didn't mind their initial dependency. In fact, he kind of enjoyed having that degree of control over their lives. Jeremy was put in a bilingual preschool and started fitting in almost immediately. Carol was scared at first, but seeing Jeremy's attitude each day after she picked him up from school reduced her fear. Carol set about finding a tutor for Spanish and hoped she could work with some people on teaching them some English. She spent a lot of time talking to her mother about how to make things up with Oscar. They had no new ideas other than loving him for as long as it took. He had asked them to stop apologizing. Oscar did not initiate contact with anyone other than Jeremy. He was still not comfortable being loved by anyone. His hate for their betrayal always lurked beneath the surface. Being with Jeremy, however, began to unlock the loving part of his heart. He actually got jealous when Jeremy started wanting to play with friends from school instead of playing with him. Still, Jeremy filled most of Oscar's time after school was over each day. Jeremy and Carol seemed to adjust to life in Costa Rica much better than Jean. Her daily attitude seemed to depend on whatever perception she had from her most recent interaction with Oscar. She seemed to be walking on eggshells with combat boots, fearful of saying something that would upset Oscar. Likewise, Oscar was always careful in what he said because of Jean's proclivity in putting a negative twist on neutral statements he made. Finally, Oscar asked Jean to have a talk. Oscar and Jean were early risers. Their best time of the day was the morning coffee and pastry time on the big house patio. Oscar broached the walking on eggshells issue. He asked Jean what she thought they could do to have some sort of non-adversarial relationship without her always being afraid. Jean confessed she had wanted to have this talk too. Her appraisal matched Oscar's. She did, however, offer a suggestion. You talked about getting help from a therapist before. Could we go together and see if she could help us? Oscar agreed. That is a good idea. Just understand that I am primarily trying to make our time in Costa Rica as mutually beneficial as possible. I am still trying to figure out what, if any, relationship we might have. I will go if you understand. I am not trying to reclaim our marriage. I understand that. You should understand that I will be satisfied with any relationship where we are with each other. Of course, I want to be as close to a wife as I can. I love you and I have a tremendous debt to repay to you. Thank you for all you have done for us. This place is wonderful. Oscar and Jean met with Dr. Perez. Rebecca was pleased to meet Jean after all the stories she had heard from Oscar. Her initial impression is that Jean was truly sorry for what she did and seemed genuinely trying to make it up to Oscar. After initial discussions, Dr. Perez began to wonder, however, if Jean fully understood the pain she had caused Oscar. She took an approach she thought was risky. Jean, what is the extent of your knowledge of Oscar's time in prison? That was not a question Jean was expecting. Well, Oscar doesn't like to talk about it. I have seen the carving on his chest and stab wounds. Worst of all is his burnt hands. I can't imagine how horrible that time in prison was for him. That may be part of the problem. I wonder if you truly understand what he suffered in prison. The intense hate he developed for Brian, you and Carol while in prison increased by each new torture he suffered. Oscar, I think you need to tell Jean about your tortures. She needs to know. I don't agree. I get enough pity as it is. I think part of her problem is that she doesn't understand why, when she makes loving overtures to you, that you don't respond positively. Her judgment is at least partially based on what she thinks your suffering was. She needs to know the height of the mountain she has to climb. Oscar stewed in his chair for a while. This was not something he wanted to do. I will agree to tell as long as you realize that this is the last time I ever want to talk about this. I have adjusted somewhat to tolerate the memories, and I am afraid this will prompt the return of my nightmares. I understand. Rebecca looked at Jean, who was already crying in anticipation. Oscar then went into great detail of the stabbings, beatings, carving, frying, and the other abuse. He talked about surviving mostly to get his revenge, especially Brian, but Jean and Carol also. In his mind, the emotional torture he suffered because of their betrayal was just about as bad as his physical torture. He was frank about his not being able to survive in this situation if it had not been for Jeremy and Dr. Perez's help. Jean had been crying louder and louder. Several times she had to interrupt Oscar's story to go to the bathroom for a break. She forced herself to return to the room. After a while, she gathered herself enough to respond. I had no idea of the level of horror you had to endure and how much my lack of faith in you has caused you tremendous pain. My gut reaction is that there is no way that I can ever make up enough for you, forgive me, and be willing to be anything close to husband and wife again. What I have to say, I have been thinking about for some time. This session has helped me to this decision. Oscar, I love you so much I believe I have to leave and give you the opportunity to meet someone new who doesn't refresh the unspeakable terror you faced, or a wife who did not have faith in you. I have plenty of money left from my mother's estate to make a new start without your financial assistance. I will keep in touch with Carol. Goodbye. Jean left the office. Oscar remained seated. Both were silent for a while. He finally spoke. So, do you consider that a loss or a win? Rebecca replied, you know, you can really be an hijo de punta, can't you? I try not to see the work I do as wins or losses. I think Jean finally understands what she is facing if she tries to have a life with you. Today's session pushed her to make the decision now for what she probably would have done later after more and more time of stagnation, stress, and worry on both your parts. So, if I had to score it, I consider it a win. What about you? Oscar pondered before speaking. To be honest, I'm kind of disappointed she gave up. On the other hand, I am glad that the tension in our relationship is now gone. I felt it the second she left. I really hope she finds happiness. Except for one huge mistake in judgment. She probably is a wonderful woman. Rebecca smiled. Do you see a need for us to meet anymore? Not unless Carol wants to. For some reason, I seem to have a lot less animosity against her. Probably because she was only 12 and was naive when she lied about my molesting. Being the mother of Jeremy certainly has helped her cause. If I could ever classify a time when I am actually happy, it's when I'm around him. For a while, I was not sure I could be happy ever again. I'll wait for you to call then, if you need me. Oscar went to one of his favorite local restaurants to give Jean time to say her goodbyes to Carol and Jeremy. He was afraid that Carol might try to go with her, but he doubted it. She seemed to really like it here and Jeremy definitely did. Still, he had to be prepared for what he would find back at the house. Carol and Jeremy's faces were showing the signs of crying, but there was no evidence they were packing. Mom told us her conclusion about what she needed to do. Although I know how much she wanted to make things right with you, I understand how that could be considered impossible. I just hope you don't decide later you should have made it easier on her to be forgiven. I also know you wouldn't be as nice to me as you are if it wasn't for Jeremy. I'm okay with that. If you wondered what we were going to do, we would like to stay here with you. We love it here, and I still plan to continue to build that bridge back to your heart that I destroyed. So, as Jeremy would say, I'm stuck to you. Jeremy spoke up. I want to stay here with you, Grandpa. By the way, Mom has a boyfriend. Jeremy. Well, the little bugger is somewhat correct. I have a date with my Spanish tutor. He is also the youth minister at Sol de Justicia Methodist Church and is finishing his law degree. I'm not sure how serious it is, but I feel good when I am with him. As the months went by, Oscar came to enjoy life more and more. He continued his close relationship to Jeremy and enjoyed morning coffees with Carol now instead of Jean. He did have to be careful because Carol was not a human being until she had at least one cup of coffee in her. She said she had no idea mornings could start this early. Oscar kept his routine of morning coffee with the gringos at Café Delicious. Membership varied from day to day. Temporary members included vacationers, missionaries, and people looking for a house to buy. One day, Roger remarked that Oscar seemed to be in better physical shape and mellower in attitude. He assumed Oscar was getting laid on a regular basis again. Oscar said it was just something about living in Costa Rica could do that to a person, but the getting laid idea was not bad. Oscar had opportunities to date some of the unattached gringas who lived in Grecia and even some of the female Costa Ricans. Of course, he always had the opportunity to renew his use of local hookers. Despite the physical urges to relieve himself, he hesitated to make the effort for a relationship. He did go back to hookers occasionally for professional help. He didn't need the stress all the relationship building could cause. Maybe later. Things were looking up in the daytime. Oscar's nightmares increased. His method of dealing with them before was not working now. Back to Dr. Perez. He brought her up to date on his life since their last session. Rebecca asked, "Did you enjoy your torture in prison?" Oscar was taken aback, so he attacked. "Is this some type of psychobabble gimmick? Some trick to get me to have insight into my problem and convert me into a human being?" "Yes, it is a gimmick. It doesn't matter if you know it is if it helps you. Now answer the question." "No, I did not enjoy the torture." "You're lying. You must enjoy torture because you keep torturing yourself. I think you created some defense technique to survive the new torture you could expect would greet you each day in prison. You are so used to being tortured. You provide the torture if someone else doesn't. You don't know how to live without torture. Oscar, you have to forgive your torturers. You have to quit letting them continue to torture you. How the hell can I do that after what they did to me? They can't torture you in the future unless you let them. I understand there is an American saying, the best revenge is a life well lived. You cannot live life well unless you forgive. You have a lot to live for, Oscar. A lot to live well for. Oscar grinned. Can I still be satisfied with the revenge on Brian? Rebecca laughed. Yes. I think he is the truly evil one. Oscar, I'll try, I guess. When he reached deep down in his soul, Oscar already had known this was what he had to do. He needed regular, daily help though to be able to forgive. He turned to the church. Sol de Justicia had both an English and a Spanish service. Oscar attended both. He noted that church here was different than what he had grown up with. There was no hellfire and damnation sermons. It was more hate the sin but love the sinner. He was impressed with the church's missionary work with indigenous tribes. The other thing that struck Oscar was that whereas he had seen people in churches in the US would be glad to come to church, the people at Sol de Justicia were happy to be there. Perhaps a subtle difference, but it was a noticeable difference. He began to feel a similar difference in his thought patterns. It was almost a year when the bell at the front gate rang. Oscar went to the gate, noting it was a woman. Many Costa Ricans had a side business to supplement the family's income, so door-to-door solicitations were common. Something about this woman was familiar to Oscar. It was Jean. It was a Jean with a complete makeover. She had different hair color and style, different clothes. Her teeth had been whitened. She looked fantastic. He wanted to play it cool, but he had to smile at what he was seeing. Hola, senor. Hola, senora. Senorita, por favor. What can I do for you? Months ago, I heard this heart-wrenching story from a woman named Jean that touched my soul. She told me of this wonderful man who had suffered unjustly and was cheated by her, his wife. She said her cheating was so bad that she had to leave. She said that he needed a new woman who would love him above anyone else, including herself. She hoped that I would never make the mistake she did. Please, senor, if that job is still open, I would like to apply. At that exact moment, Oscar knew it was the right time to forgive. I don't know. Would your services include awesome sex? Jean relaxed and smiled. Only if we could do it every day. I think that could be arranged. How much would you like in pay? Just to be here and be allowed to occupy a tiny bit of your heart. Come in and let me introduce you to my family. They went into the big house and saw Jeremy and Carol. His daughter shook her head and exclaimed, "Mother, is that you? What have you done to yourself?" "Carol, Jeremy, this is Lolita. She has come to give me a new woman to restart my life with. She will be living in the guest house with me. Please welcome her into our family." Carol hugged her mother, and they both were crying profusely. Jeremy was puzzled. "Grandpa, isn't that Grandma Jean?" "Yes. We're doing a little pretending. Can you play along?" "I guess, but grown-ups around here are really weird." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.